Wilfred Billy Coutu. When people think of early NHL enforcers, names like Eddie Shore or Sprague Cleghorn often come to mind. But few embodied the rugged, volatile nature of 1920s hockey quite like Billy Coutu. Born in North Bay, Ontario in 1892, Coutu was a tough, rugged defense-first player who let others handle the scoring and understood his primary job was to shut down opponents' offense. Billy made his mark in the league with the Montreal Canadiens before being traded to the Boston Bruins. He wasn't a prolific scorer, but he was known for his physical presence, willingness to fight, and, at times, a short fuse. That temper would get the best of him in one of the biggest and most unexpected moments in NHL history to date. The Boston Bruins played the Ottawa Senators in the final of the Stanley Cup on April 13, 1927. The game was tense and physical, with Ottawa on the verge of clinching the championship. Both teams were putting it all on the line for the privilege of being called the best. When the final buzzer sounded, emotions exploded. Instead of heading for the dressing room, Coutu skated straight for referee Jerry Laflamme, throwing punches. He then tackled another official, Billy Bell, to the ice during the post-game chaos. Even in an era where on-ice brawls were common, attacking an official crossed an unbreakable line. NHL President Frank Calder wasted no time. Coutu was banned from the NHL for life, making him the first and, to this day, only player to receive an official lifetime ban from the league. He was still allowed to play in the minor leagues and even took up coaching. But his NHL career was finished in an instant. 2 years later, in 1929, the league quietly lifted the ban, but it was far too late. By that point, Coutu was past his prime, and no team wanted the baggage of signing a player with such a notorious history. His final NHL game had been that night in Ottawa. Coutu's ban became a cautionary tale for generations of players. While hard hits and fights remain part of the sport, physical abuse of referees is deemed beyond forgiveness. Coutu's lifelong ban made this point clear without any doubt, and no player since has ever crossed this line. Don Gallagher and Billy Taylor. Two of the brightest young prospects in the NHL during the 1940s, Don Gallagher and Billy Taylor, were poised and ready for long, impactful careers. Gallagher, born in 1925 in Boston, Massachusetts, was a speedy, intelligent center with a knack for setting up plays, while Taylor, born in 1924 in Canada, was a forward known for his scoring ability and strong hockey sense. By their early 20s, both were carving out reputations as talented, reliable players for the Boston Bruins, and fans and teammates alike expected them to become cornerstones of the franchise. However, their promising careers came to an abrupt and shocking end in 1948 when they became embroiled in a gambling scandal. The pair had bet on NHL games, a serious offense even if they never manipulated outcomes. At a time when the league was trying to protect its integrity, the very act of wagering on professional contests was seen as an existential threat to the sport. President Clarence Campbell took this opportunity to show the hockey world that the NHL stood firm on its no gambling policy, even if the offenders were players with potential Hall of Fame careers. Both players were issued lifetime bans. At just 23 and 24 years old, Gallagher and Taylor were effectively exiled from the league at the height of their potential, leaving behind promising careers that had barely begun. The lifetime bans were absolute. Neither player could play for another NHL team, and the league's zero-tolerance approach made clear that talent offered no protection against violations of its ethical code. The decision sent shockwaves through the hockey world, illustrating that the NHL prioritized the integrity of the game over individual careers, regardless of how promising the prospects were. In 1970, more than 2 decades later, the league reinstated both Gallagher and Taylor. By that time, however, the opportunity to return to the ice rink had long passed, and their NHL careers remained effectively over. The scandal and its consequences have endured in NHL history, not just as a story of personal misjudgment, but as a foundational example of the league's strict disciplinary standards. Gallagher and Taylor's story serves as a cautionary tale. demonstrating that even the most talented young stars were not immune to punishment when the integrity of the game was at stake. Their brief but memorable careers are remembered both for their on-ice promise and for the lasting lesson their lifetime bans taught generations of NHL players. Brant Meyers. This story is one of talent, struggle, and ultimately redemption outside the NHL. Hailing from Calgary, Alberta, Brant Meyers was a classic enforcer, a physical winger who could protect his teammates, fight when necessary, and contribute energy on the ice. He wasn't a scoring star, but teams valued his toughness, his willingness to stand up for teammates, and his ability to change momentum with his physical play. Meyers played for several NHL teams during the 1990s and early 2000s, including the Tampa Bay Lightning, St. Louis Blues, and Los Angeles Kings, carving out a respectable, if unglamorous, career. However, Meyers' career was repeatedly derailed by off-ice struggles with substance abuse. His issues with alcohol and drugs led him into the NHL's Substance Abuse and Behavioral Health Program multiple times. Despite league support, he repeatedly failed to meet the program's requirements, culminating in a lifetime ban from the NHL. This ban was one of the rare instances where a player was removed from the league not for violent behavior or gambling, but for repeated failures to comply with the league's efforts to protect his health and enforce its policies. For Meyers, the ban was devastating. His physical style of play had earned him a solid career as a role player, but substance abuse prevented him from maintaining the discipline needed to remain in professional hockey. Yet, unlike some other banned players whose stories ended in obscurity, Meyers eventually found a path to redemption. After getting clean, he returned to the sport in a new capacity, working as a player assistance director, helping current players navigate the challenges he had faced firsthand. Meyers' story stands out in NHL history because it highlights the league's evolving approach to discipline. The NHL recognized that off-ice health and behavioral issues could impact both a player's career and the broader reputation of the league. By enforcing a lifetime ban, the league made clear that repeated violations of substance abuse protocols were taken as seriously as on-ice misconduct. Ultimately, Brant Meyers' legacy is twofold. He is remembered both as a tough, physical player who played the enforcer role to the fullest and as a cautionary tale about the dangers of substance abuse in professional sports. His journey also provides hope, showing that even after the harshest league punishments, it is possible to rebuild one's life and contribute meaningfully to the hockey community. Marty McSorley. Whether it is the team culture that the Bruins built up over the years as the toughest, baddest team in the NHL, or just a pure coincidence, Marty McSorley is another player from the black and gold who got a career-ending ban. Known throughout his career as an enforcer, McSorley's role was to protect star players and intimidate opponents. He was tough, fearless, and a throwback to hockey's rougher days, a player who thrived on physicality and confrontation. On February 21, 2000, in a game between the Boston Bruins and the Vancouver Canucks, Marty's name was forever etched into one of the ugliest moments in NHL history. It was late in the game, and the Bruins were trailing. McSorley chased down Vancouver forward Donald Brashear after an earlier confrontation. Instead of letting the moment go, McSorley swung his stick in a baseball-like motion, striking Brashear in the head. Brashear collapsed instantly, his helmet popping off as his head hit the ice. The blow left him with a severe concussion, and the disturbing footage quickly spread across the hockey world. The incident wasn't seen as just another fight gone too far. It was a deliberate, violent act. The NHL reacted swiftly, suspending McSorley for the remainder of the season, including the playoffs. That suspension would later be extended into the next season, effectively ending his NHL career. On top of that, McSorley faced criminal charges in Canada for assault with a weapon, becoming one of the very few players in league history to be prosecuted for on-ice actions. He was found guilty and received an 18-month conditional discharge. For many, this was the moment the league made it clear that such intentionally harmful and aggressive violence, even in a sport as physical and intense as hockey, had no place on the ice. This singular moment overshadowed the entirety of McSorley's lengthy and successful career, which had included 2 Stanley Cups with the Edmonton Oilers and a reputation as one of the toughest players of his era. While McSorley still defends himself by saying he never meant to injure Brassier so severely, the incident stands as a turning point in the NHL's approach to discipline. It sent a message that crossing the line into outright assault could not only end a career, but also lead to real-world legal consequences. Raffi Torres. A case study in how a player's physical style can cross the line from aggressive to downright dangerous. Raffi Torres is remembered less for his goals and more for the long list of suspensions that ultimately drove him out of the NHL. Drafted 5th overall by the New York Islanders in 2000, Torres entered the league with the pedigree of a top prospect, the kind of player expected to be a dependable scoring winger who could also throw his weight around. And for a time, he showed flashes of that potential. He could score timely goals, get under opponents' skin, and deliver hits that brought the crowd to its feet. The problem was, too many of those hits were over the line. Torres developed a reputation as one of the league's most controversial hitters, the kind of guy whose highlight reel had as many crushing checks as it did offensive plays. But, unlike the clean, textbook body checks fans love, Torres too often aimed high, catching opponents in the head, and in a league that has become increasingly aware of the dangers of head injuries, that's a fast way to get noticed for all the wrong reasons. His suspension history reads like a cautionary tale. The most infamous came in the 2012 playoffs, when Torres launched himself into Chicago's Marian Hossa, leaving Hossa motionless on the ice and earning Torres a 21-game ban, one of the harshest at the time. That should have been the moment he changed. Instead, he kept crossing the same line, each incident adding to his reputation as a reckless repeat offender. The final straw came on October 3rd, 2015, in a preseason game between the San Jose Sharks and Anaheim Ducks. Torres caught Jakob Silfverberg with an illegal check to the head, and the NHL Department of Player Safety had seen enough. They threw the book at him, a 41-game suspension, the longest ever handed down for an on-ice incident. Technically, Torres could have returned after serving the ban, but no team wanted the baggage that came with signing him. That effectively ended his NHL career, leaving him as a reminder that in hockey, there's a fine line between physical and dangerous, and once you cross it too often, there's no coming back. Shane Pinto. This is one of the rare modern-day examples of an NHL gambling suspension, and a reminder that although the league's rules on betting have been in place for over a century, they are anything but relics. Shane Pinto, a promising young center for the Ottawa Senators, had just wrapped up his first full NHL season in 2022-23, scoring 20 goals and carving out a role as one of the team's most dependable two-way forwards. He was widely seen as a key part of Ottawa's long-term rebuild, the kind of player you picture in the lineup for the next decade. Then came October 26, 2023, and the announcement that stunned the hockey world. Pinto had been suspended 41 games for violating the NHL's gambling rules. The league stressed that Pinto had not bet on NHL games, which could have led to a lifetime ban. But reports linked the punishment to proxy betting, where wagers are placed through another person. Even without direct bets on hockey, this still crossed the league's clearly drawn line. The news hit hard in Ottawa. Pinto was a restricted free agent negotiating a new contract, and suddenly, instead of picturing him anchoring the team's middle six, the Senators were scrambling to fill the hole he left. Fans and media alike were shocked. Gambling scandals in the NHL had mostly been relegated to the history books, like the infamous 1948 case of Billy Taylor and Don Gallagher. What made this suspension even more jarring was the backdrop. The modern NHL is surrounded by gambling sponsorships, ads, and betting integrations. Yet, for players, the rules remain absolute. When Pinto returned in January 2024, he was humble, remorseful, and visibly eager to move forward. Ottawa welcomed him back with open arms, and his return was a small boost in a season full of turbulence. Now, Pinto's challenge is twofold: to re-establish himself as a core piece of the Senators' future, and to make sure his name is remembered for his play, not for one of the rarest suspensions of the modern NHL era. Chris Simon. One of the NHL's most feared enforcers, Chris Simon, was a towering forward whose presence alone could change the tone of a game. At 6'4" and weighing over 230 pounds, he brought size, strength, and an ever-present willingness to drop the gloves. He wasn't on the ice to dazzle with end-to-end rushes or score 50 goals. His role was far more direct: protect his teammates, intimidate opponents, and make sure no one took liberties with his club's star players. Simon carved out a long career despite his limited offensive production, suiting up for the Quebec Nordiques, Washington Capitals, Chicago Blackhawks, New York Rangers, Calgary Flames, New York Islanders, and Minnesota Wild. For years, he was the type of player you wanted on your side and dreaded to face. But Simon's physical edge often teetered on the edge of the rulebook, and more than once, it crossed the line. The defining year came in 2007. Playing for the Islanders, Simon shocked the hockey world when he stomped on the leg of Pittsburgh's Jarkko Ruutu with his skate. It was the kind of moment that instantly goes down in NHL infamy, and the league responded with a 30-game suspension, one of the longest ever at the time. The outrage was swift, with players, coaches, and fans alike condemning the act. Only months later, the controversy flared again. In another flash of frustration, Simon struck Rangers forward Ryan Hallweg in the face with his stick, earning a 25-game ban. Two massive suspensions in the same year all but closed the door on his NHL career. By the end of his time in the league, Simon had served 8 suspensions totaling over 65 games. No general manager was willing to take a chance on a player whose name had become synonymous with on-ice violence. He finished his career overseas in the KHL, but his NHL legacy remained dominated by those infamous moments. Simon's story is a reminder of how quickly the enforcer's fine line between intimidation and brutality can blur, and how crossing it can erase years of hard-earned respect in the blink of an eye. Grant Fuhr. This is the kind of iconic name that hockey fans wish were not in this conversation. Grant Fuhr is an all-time great of the game, and his name is etched into hockey history as one of the NHL's most dynamic and resilient goaltenders. A cornerstone of the Edmonton Oilers dynasty in the 1980s, Fuhr's lightning-fast reflexes, incredible athleticism, and uncanny ability to deliver in big moments helped the team capture 5 Stanley Cups. He was the kind of goalie who thrived under pressure, capable of stealing games with highlight reel saves, and his career numbers eventually earned him a place in the Hockey Hall of Fame. But in 1990, his stellar reputation took a serious hit when he was suspended for substance abuse, a ban that shocked the hockey world. The trouble began when Fuhr admitted to using cocaine during the mid to late 1980s. While he stated that he had never used it during the actual season, the NHL treated the matter seriously, especially given growing concerns about drug use in professional sports at the time. Commissioner John Ziegler handed Fuhr a 1-year suspension, one of the harshest penalties for a star player in league history. At the time, such public acknowledgement from a player of Fuhr's stature was unprecedented, and the suspension immediately became a national sports story. Fuhr's absence left the Oilers scrambling, and many wondered whether his career could recover from the damage. But the goalie refused to let the ban define him. After missing 59 games, the NHL reinstated Fuhr early for good behavior, and he returned determined to prove he still had elite talent. He went on to play for multiple teams, including the Toronto Maple Leafs, Buffalo Sabres, and St. Louis Blues, showing flashes of his old brilliance well into the late 90s. In hindsight, Fuhr's suspension became both a cautionary tale and a redemption story. It highlighted the NHL's willingness not to bend the rules for even a player of Fuhr's stature, while also showing that a player could rebuild his career with the right attitude and work ethic. Today, while the ban remains a notable chapter in his biography, it's overshadowed by his legacy as one of the greatest goaltenders to ever play the game, a player whose athletic heroics still stand the test of time. Bob Probert. To his teammates and fans, he was a warrior. To his opponents, a relentless foe. But behind the fights and the cheers, Bob Probert faced battles far from the ice, battles he could never seem to win. Such is the dual legacy of Bob Probert. Few enforcers in NHL history embodied both the toughness and the turbulence of the game quite like Bob. Known as one half of the legendary Bruise Brothers, with Joey Coker on the Detroit Red Wings, Probert was one of the most feared fighters of the 1980s and early 90s. He had the size, the fists, and the intimidation factor that made him a nightmare for opposing players. But he also had the skill to contribute offensively, something that separated him from many other pure enforcers. Woefully, Probert's career was shadowed by personal struggles, most notably his issues with substance abuse. The defining low point came in 1989 when he was arrested while attempting to cross the US-Canada border with cocaine in his possession. The NHL responded with a lifetime ban, a move that was as much about sending a message as it was about the individual case. While the league's ban was eventually lifted after Probert served time and went through rehabilitation, it was a turning point in his career and life. Even after returning to the ice, the off-ice problems continued to follow him, with multiple suspensions related to substance use. Yet Probert never lost his place in the hearts of fans. His fearlessness on the ice and willingness to stand up for teammates made him a folk hero in Detroit and later with the Chicago Blackhawks. His story is a bittersweet one. On one hand, Probert was a player who could tilt the emotional balance of a game with a single shift or a single fight. On the other hand, he was a cautionary tale of how personal demons can derail even the most promising careers. In the end, Probert remains an unforgettable figure in NHL history, a fighter on the ice, a troubled man off it, and a reminder that hardship comes in many forms, not all of them physical. Jesse Bulleries. Few incidents in NHL history have drawn as much instant outrage as the vicious cross-check that forever defined Jesse Bulleries' career. Known as a tough, physical player who was never shy about dropping the gloves, Bulleries carved out his role as an enforcer over stints with teams like the Philadelphia Flyers, Carolina Hurricanes, St. Louis Blues, and a brief run with the Edmonton Oilers. He wasn't a star, but he brought the grit and edge that coaches valued in the late 90s and early 2000s, a time when intimidation was still woven into the game's fabric. But on October 10th, 2007, that edge turned into something far uglier. In a game between the Flyers and Vancouver Canucks, Bulleries delivered a brutal high cross-check directly to the face of Ryan Kessler. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment shoving match gone wrong, nor a borderline play in front of the net. It was deliberate, reckless, and clearly meant to send a message, just not the kind of viciousness hockey wanted to endorse. The NHL acted fast, handing Bulleries a 25-game suspension. At the time, it tied Chris Simon's infamous ban from earlier that same year, making it one of the longest suspensions in league history. For a sport that had historically tolerated a fair amount of nastiness, this was the league drawing a very clear line in the ice. There are hits, there are fights, and then there are acts that simply have no place in the game. The fallout was immediate. The clip was replayed endlessly, not for any hockey brilliance, but as an example of what the NHL was trying to move away from. Fans, players, and media alike condemned the play, and while Bulleries did serve his time, the damage was done. His reputation never recovered. He would play only a handful more NHL games after that, spending the rest of his career bouncing between the AHL and overseas leagues. No matter where he went, the shadow of that single night in 2007 followed him. In the end, Bulleries' legacy serves as a cautionary tale. In a league where toughness is valued, crossing that invisible line doesn't just cost you games, it can define your career forever.